All right. Well, if you have your Bibles, if you would open to Job chapter 32. Job chapter 32 as we continue in our study of the book of Job. And we've hit kind of an interlude, if you will, kind of an intermission in the book of Job. Job has finished his discourse, his arguments with his three friends. They've argued about who God is and how God operates in the world. And both of them have kind of just landed in the same place where they began. Job's friends just saying, you know what, you're wicked, and that's why you're receiving this suffering. Job saying, I'm not wicked, and God is treating me unfairly. And so Job just kind of finishes out, and then we have this one line in the text that just says, the words of Job are ended. So I kind of always picture that as you have two people arguing with one another, and then finally they just come with there's no more words to say because nobody's moving. Right? I know none of my married couples in here have ever come to that point, right? We're just like, right? That's kind of how I feel that with that line. That's what Job's just like, so there, right? And we just kind of come to this place that Job's friends have nothing left to say. Job has nothing left to say because he's still just holding on to his own righteousness. And now we have this guy named Elihu. Okay? And Elihu is an odd cat because, first of all, we didn't know he was even there. Okay? And so because of the strangeness of both Elihu's presence and then how he kind of addresses Job and the friends and all this stuff, there are a lot of scholars who in kind of our more modern critical age have thought that maybe this was put in later and not part of the story. Okay? But there are a lot of reasons in Elihu that probably why he may not have been introduced at the beginning. First of all, Elihu, as we're going to see as we read, he was a younger man. Okay? Not someone of note. And probably not someone who had traveled from as far as Job's three friends. This is a young cat. This is a guy who has not established himself. He's probably not rich. He's probably not very influential because as we read his name, as we'll do in just a minute, that he's given a lineage. Like this guy's not important, but you might know his dad. And if you don't know his dad, you might know his dad. And if you don't know that, you might know where he's from. Right? But we're going to approach this not as if this was something that was inserted later or in the wrong place, as a lot of scholars are going to try to do for us. We're going to take this as God gives it to us and see this as important. And Elihu is going to represent, for the historical context in which he lives, a much more balanced view of who God is based on the evidence at hand. And we've talked about with both Job and his three friends that they come from a certain theological perspective. And that theological perspective is lacking because God has not, up until that point that we believe the story of Job takes place, God has not fully unfolded his work of redemption or even the intricacies of his personality, his nature. Now, we know from other parts of Scripture, both Psalm 19, Romans chapter 1, that God reveals himself first off and most primarily in nature. That his divine nature, his attributes are all seen clearly. To where we should have there shouldn't even be a discussion about whether or not there is a God because of how clearly God has made himself known through creation. Now, obviously, especially as we read Romans chapter 1, we find that we as human beings have traded the truth of who God is as he has revealed that for the lie that, okay, he's not who he says he is or who he displays himself to be through the greatness and vastness of creation. But in this historical context, Elihu is going to give a much more balanced view than what both Job's three friends are going to give, which is essentially a karma God. A God who rewards those who do good and then immediately punishes those who do wicked. But he's also going to give a more balanced view than the one that Job presents, who says that, you know what, God just doesn't care about anybody. Because I'm righteous and he's treating me this way. He's treating me this way. And it's unfair and I don't like it. And then we have Elihu who is going to come in between. He's going to give us a different picture of a God who again has not yet fully revealed himself through special revelation, through prophetic words, through God speaking to man. Really all of these men have up until this point that we have recorded is the story of creation, the line of Adam perhaps, the account of Noah, and the flood and God's righteous judgment on the world for their wickedness. And maybe at this point in history, maybe the Tower of Babel, maybe that has reached this group. But beyond that, that's all they have. They're limited in their understanding about who God is because God has not spoken who he is. They're limited on their understanding of what's most important because all they see is the physical world. They don't have somebody who's come back from the dead to tell them what it's like. And God has not yet revealed, like, this is what's waiting for those who are mine whenever death comes and this life is over. So we're going to see those things also in Elihu, that even though he is giving a more balance, we still are not given the perfect perspective until God shows up on the scene. And if you would, read with me Job chapter 32, starting in verse 1. So these three men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Then Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite of the family of Ram, burned with anger. He burned with anger at Job because he justified himself rather than God. He burned with anger also at Job's three friends because they had found no answer, although they had declared Job to be in the wrong. Now Elihu had waited to speak to Job because they were older than he. And when Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these three men, he burned with anger. And Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite, answered and said, and by the way, I have no idea if that's the correct pronunciation. That's just the best I can do. Anyway, here we go. He answered and said, I am young in years, and you are aged. Therefore, I was timid and afraid to declare my opinion to you. I said, let days speak, and many years teach wisdom. But it is the spirit in man, the breath of the Almighty, that makes him understand. It is not the old who are wise, nor the aged who understand what is right. Therefore, I say, listen to me, and let me also declare my opinion. Behold, I waited for your words. I listened for your wise sayings while you searched out what to say. I gave you my attention, and behold, there was none among you who refuted Job or who answered his words. Beware lest you say, we have found wisdom. God may vanquish him, not a man. He has not directed his words against me, and I will not answer him with your speeches. They are dismayed. They answer no more. They have not a word to say. And shall I wait because they do not speak? Because they stand there and answer no more? I also will answer with my share. I also will declare my opinion, for I am full of words. The spirit within me constrains me. Behold, my belly is like wine that has no vent, like a new wineskins, ready to burst. I must speak that I may find relief. I must open my lips and answer. I will not show partiality to any man or use flattery toward any person, for I do not know how to flatter, else my Maker would soon take me away. Okay, so we have Elihu giving his introduction and his insertion into this discussion. And what he's going to say is, listen, I don't agree with these guys. I don't agree with this guy, so I'm going to say my opinion, right? And we've all kind of had those moments, haven't we, where we've been kind of on the outside of a discussion, and we felt like we really had something to say, but no, we're going to see how it all works out, and then at the end, we're like, you guys both are wrong, and I've got something to say, right? We kind of know how this, like, we can relate with Elihu here. I know, him being a younger man, this is not a conversation he would have been invited into because he's too young to have this wisdom. And as we've seen through Job's three friends, this is something that they're very proud of, their wisdom that they found. They're very proud of their heritage of understanding. They're very proud that they've looked back to the past and they've gleaned all of this information. Now they've come to this perfect system of theology. And yet, as we've read, it's completely broken down in the person of Job. An actual human experience. We have Job also who most likely before his suffering fell into line mostly with these guys' understanding. And now he's confused and now he's saying things out of his pain against God. So Elihu is brought to this point, this boiling over by these men's arguments, and neither one of them are able to move the other. And this is something that is important for us. Again, as we've watched this suffering, as we've watched this play out, we must discern here what this means for us. As we've talked about many times over, as we've looked at Job's friends and we've looked at the nature of suffering and how we are to comfort and all of these things, one of the things that is vitally important is that the truth be the one to bring comfort. Now, Elihu, as a younger man, wanting to maybe score some points with some of the older, more elite guys, would have been tempted to flattery, to say, you know what, I'm with these guys, right? Because he's risking something here and even speaking to these men. These are the powerful guys. These are the guys that control the societal aspects of where they live and who they are. These are the guys that everybody looks to as being the guys that have it all together. And yet they haven't necessarily spoken the truth, or if they've tried, they've done it with a twist for their own gain. Right? Job's three friends, they're happy to speak to Job about his sin as long as they get to be the ones who are above him judging him. Right? It's not that they're all sinners together, but rather Job's the one and they're up here. Right? Job in the same way. He speaks enough truth that the friends don't have anything to answer, and yet his focus is on himself, his pain, his suffering, the injustice done to him. So with a twist of self-righteousness, of self-focus, selfishness. Elihu, not really having a dog in the fight and being a younger man, he waits to speak his piece. And the piece that he's going to speak is going to be a more balanced view, and yet, again, not complete. So let's look at how he begins his discourse with Job. Chapter 33, starting in verse 1. But now hear my speech, O Job, and listen to all my words. Behold, I open my mouth, the tongue in my mouth speaks. My words declare the uprightness of my heart, and what my lips know they speak sincerely. The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. Answer me if you can. Set your words in order before me. Take your stand. Behold, I am toward God as you are. I too was pinched off from a piece of clay. Behold, no fear of me need terrify you. My pressure will not be heavy upon you. Surely you have spoken in my ears, and I have heard the sound of your words. You say, I am pure, without transgression. I am clean. There is no iniquity in me. Behold, he finds occasions against me. He counts me as his enemy. He puts my feet in the stocks and watches all my paths. Behold, in this you are not right. I will answer you, for God is greater than man. Why do you contend against him, saying, he will answer none of man's words? For God speaks in one way and in two, though man does not perceive it. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on men, while they slumber on their beds, then he opens the ears of men and terrifies them with warnings that he may turn man aside from his deed and conceal pride from a man. He keeps back his soul from the pit, his life from perishing by the sword. Man is also rebuked with pain on his bed and with continual strife in his bones, so that his life loathes bread and his appetite the choicest food. His flesh is so wasted away that it cannot be seen, and his bones that were not seen stick out. His soul draws near the pit, and his life to those who bring death. If there be for him an angel, a mediator, one of the 1,000 to declare to man what is right for him, and he is merciful to him and says, deliver him from going down into the pit. I have found a ransom. Let his flesh become fresh with youth. Let him return to the days of his youthful vigor. Then man prays to God, and he accepts him. He sees his face with a shout of joy, and he restores to man his righteousness. He sings before men and says, I sinned and perverted what was right, and it was not repaid to me. He has redeemed my soul from going down into the pit, and my life shall look upon the light. Behold, God does all these things twice, 3 times with a man, to bring back his soul from the pit, that he may be lighted with the light of life. Pay attention, O Job. Listen to me. Be silent, and I will speak. If you have any words, answer me. Speak, for I desire to justify you. If not, listen to me. Be silent, and I will teach you wisdom. We see here immediately a different heart in Elihu than we see from Job's 3 friends. Elihu has no desire to condemn Job, but rather to bring clarity. And again, as we use this text to help us as we either encounter suffering on our own or encounter sufferers along our journey, it is important for us to remember that any time that we look at someone's life and decide we know why they're suffering, we have put ourselves in the place of God. Now, certainly, there are those that especially if we're close enough to their lives, that we can follow a path that we may have known has led to this. Right? It doesn't take us long often if we know somebody who struggled with alcoholism to trace back where this all started and now why they're struggling with these things. Certain addictions and other things. But there are so many aspects that come in our lives that lead us to certain suffering that we cannot, with our human perspective, really ever come to the place of knowing fully the heart of another human being and why they suffer as they do. I know indeed, looking back at my life and my struggle with depression, sure, there are certain things that I look back to, tragedies and loss and things that hurt me or things that caused me grief in my life. And I can certainly look at why those things would bring me down. But why I continue to struggle to this day, 20 years removed from those moments, doesn't make sense to me. And I know my heart better than anyone except for the Lord. Brothers and sisters, we must always be guarded when we look at another heart and decide we know why. And this is the difference between Elihu and Job's 3 friends. Job's 3 friends come to Job knowing exactly why he's suffering. Right? That's their whole deal. Now, they wait a little bit to kind of, let Job kind of get geared up for their attack, but they know why Job's suffering. Job's wicked. Obviously. Doesn't matter that they're dead wrong. Doesn't matter that they've come from 50 miles away and they haven't been around Job for very often, but they know why Job is suffering. We must always be guarded in these attempts that we have of bringing comfort to other people and believing like we have the answer because we obviously know where they messed up. So Elihu comes with a different heart. He comes wanting to be help to Job. Wanting to bring clarity to Job. Wanting to be merciful to Job. And this is the heart of a true comforter. So as he goes, he begins to speak of, listen, what your friends are saying, we know not to be true. God does not always deal so justly, as they would call it, with the wicked. He does not deal so with us. When we've all had the moments where we know we've walked contrary to who He is, and yet, as we look back at certain points in our lives, we came out relatively unscathed. God is not so just watching us and ready to send the thunderbolt down to zap us as soon as we start stepping out of line. We observe in the world, we observe so many wicked people coming to power and gaining all this money and influence and all these things. We know these things not to be true. But that ought not to lend us to Job's perspective that God is just somehow creating reasons to be able to punish people. which is much of Job's argument, especially as Elihu understands it. That God doesn't need a reason to send suffering, because obviously Job has not done anything to deserve suffering. So God must have created a reason. Guess God just got bored and decided, you know what? I'm just going to create a reason to bother Job. What does Elihu say? What Elihu says is that, listen, God speaks to us in this suffering. Now that thus far has been a perspective that has not been brought to the table. That God would, out of love and in mercy, give suffering in order that that person would come to a deeper understanding of who God is and how their ways may be contrary to him. Now, as we've looked at Job, and as Job has himself confessed, whether he knew it or not, Job is extremely self-righteous. He believes that he has earned right standing before God. So it is not Job's behavior that needs adjusting. It is his heart and his perspective. It's not as if Job is secretly off doing all of these wicked things behind closed doors or in the dark. But rather, Job's righteousness externally is a mask for the wickedness internally. Now, Job is absolutely God's, and brothers and sisters, one of the first and easiest sins for Christians and people that are God's to fall into is self-righteousness, believing we are better than. And don't we love to do this? Especially with people who are different than we are. Right? Yeah, I don't know how much you look at personalities of people and stuff like that. I don't buy into a lot of it, but there are some interesting things sometimes when you talk about people who are like more type A and they're like, things have to be this way, and then you find people who are more like type B and they're like, no, they really don't. Get a bunch of those people in a room and you're going to have war. You're going to have a lot of judgment on your hands. Right? Anybody who's ever been type A and a little bit OCD, who's ever walked into my office, you felt that. Just that little hint, maybe you got over it pretty quickly, maybe you still haven't got over it, but that little bit of judgment that, oh, he's one of those. Right? We all do this, especially the people that are just a little different than us, different in personality, different in perspective. We do this with people. We felt this all the time when we lived in South Korea. Because we were American and we were foreign, we didn't know how to do anything. I mean, people trying to help us to cross the street like we've never seen a crosswalk before. Didn't know how to make my own coffee. It's instant. You just pour it into the thing. I think I got this one. We have a natural tendency as human beings to look at another human being and where they are different than us, judge them for it. And just because we were saved doesn't keep us from that. Good grief, we sometimes do that in church. I'll confess, I'm the son of a pastor. People watching on Sunday morning, I could have made a competitive sport. That person decided to dress up. Boy, what's wrong with them? This isn't that kind of place, right? That person didn't dress up enough. It looks like they just got out of it, right? Well, we do this all the time. And yes, sometimes it's playful and sometimes it's fun, but mostly it points to the heart in us that wants to elevate ourselves and how good we are above other people. With the understanding often that because we are better, God should love us more and give us better things. This self-righteousness, brothers and sisters, we must always be guarded against. As if we have somehow moved ourselves into a position to be able to look at everybody omnisciently as if we know everything about them. Because of how they dress, because of how they keep their desk, because of what kind of hair they have, whatever all the little things that we tend to judge people on, whether they use their blinker or not. They're obviously on their way to hell if they don't use their blinker in traffic. We do these things. We play these games. And God is faithful to get our attention when our hearts have moved from the understanding that we have received grace, something undeserved, instead of how our hearts want to go and thinking we've earned his love. We are nailing it. We are awesome. Why wouldn't God love us? Because, brothers and sisters, if we could really be honest with ourselves, that's where we often want to go. And we don't have to go very far to find somebody else who obviously isn't nailing it. I'm at church every week. That guy barely goes. God, you better love me, right? I read my Bible most of the time. That person has one on their phone. Obviously, I'm more spiritual than they are. We play these games so often to build ourselves up as if we can put ourselves higher by standing on other people, God's going to love us more. And Elihu's point is not that the behavior has been so often so wrong that God would then send a dream to warn that we're going the wrong direction, or send pain into us, into our lives, suffering into our lives, that we could come to understand our need for him. What Elihu is saying is that, listen, our behavior may be right and our hearts may be wrong, and God will be faithful to get our attention. But for the self-righteous, that's a hard one to hear, isn't it? Because we've convinced ourselves we don't need God's intervention in our lives. We're nailing this. I don't need him to warn me. I know, obviously, because I'm doing all the good things. So we come to a different understanding than what Job's three friends had about God, and even where Job is now wrestling with who God is. In Romans chapter 11, if you would turn there with me, is going to help us. And the idea that Paul expresses in Romans chapter 11 is one that honestly is very contrary to what a lot of people teach, especially in our churches today. Because what Paul is going to give us is a picture of a God who cannot be put in a box. And that's hard for us. Okay? Romans chapter 11, starting in verse 33. Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments, and how inscrutable his ways. Now, the American Christian wants to say, nope. Because don't we love to scrutinize God's ways? Don't you? Don't we love whenever God gives us something, maybe that we didn't expect? We love to scrutinize whether or not God made the right decision. Like, God, how could you do this? God, how dare you do this? God, this is unfair. All of that language, brothers and sisters, that's scrutinizing what God has decided for us. Our human natures don't like a God we can't control and can't fully know. We have a hard time with that one. Because we like control and we like to be the smartest one in the room. Right? We want those things. We try in every situation to be that. And we'll avoid other situations if we know we're not going to be the smartest one in the room. We'll chalk up something like, well, they just don't get me. No, you're just not smart enough. Harsh to say, isn't it? When we come to God, we like a God we can control, especially with our behavior. A God who owes us when we've given to him. A God who is much more like a vending machine than the God of the universe. We put our good deeds in, and we get what we want back. Paul's going to say, listen, this God that we serve, the God who by a word created the universe, you want to put him in a box? You want to be able to scrutinize whether he's dealing justly with you? You want to be able to call him bad or wrong or unfair? He's not going to give you that. But how beautiful is this God? Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord? Or who has been his counselor? Or who has given a gift to him that he might be repaid? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever. Amen. Brothers and sisters, most often the reason why we struggle with suffering in our lives is because we've believed that God is somehow searchable, able to be scrutinized, and understandable in every aspect. We can understand why God does certain things because we've mapped it out scientifically. We can understand. We try to figure out why God has done this certain thing. We want answers. We deserve answers, right? We're children of the Enlightenment. Our reason is unchartable. And the truth is that God, in his greatness, in his beauty, in his majesty, is not as small as we thought he was. And we are not as in control as we've lied to ourselves to believe. See, the question before Job and the question before the friends and the question that Elihu is going to lead them to before God finally comes to answer Job is, are we able to worship and glorify and be okay with a God who is bigger than we made him? A God who not only will give blessing and peace and comfort out of his faithfulness and his love, but will also give suffering for the same reason. Because of his love and because of his grace. And because we are, as human beings, constantly in need of letting go of things here that we might hold more tightly to him. Suffering does that for us. It shakes everything. And we can either hold more tightly to the things he's trying to take from us because it's hurting us more than our suffering is, or we can let go and be at peace that we serve a God whose riches and wisdom and knowledge are unsearchable. His judgments inscrutable. And we can rest in knowing the truths of who he is. And listen, sometimes we need to be reminded of those truths, that he is good and does good, brothers and sisters. God is good and he does good. Do you believe that? Do you trust that whatever God gives is for your good and for his glory? Or have you made a list of things that would really be for your good and really be more for his glory than this other list over here that you're really trying to avoid as much as you can? Right? And on this one you have like a new car and a big house and, a job, not even a job, just I want to live off inheritance, that kind of thing. And then over here you have anything that makes you uncomfortable. Anything that requires of you faith beyond just what makes you feel good. You see, we all love the verses that that talk about how God works things for good and how God is working even in our suffering. We love those verses as long as the suffering doesn't last too long. As long as the suffering doesn't hurt too deeply. As long as we can find a way out. We love the fact that God can calm the storms. We just don't want to be in one to find out. And God will not let us be satisfied with simply a theoretical understanding of his goodness, even in suffering. His grace for every moment that we struggle. We talked about last week out of Philippians chapter 3 about how in coming to Christ and knowing who he is, we will suffer. It may not always be physical, it will definitely be spiritual. We have to die to our sin. That doesn't feel good, brothers and sisters. We have to deny ourselves. It doesn't feel good. I mean, Jesus himself warned his disciples, listen, the world is going to hate you. They're going to persecute you. They're going to come after you. This is not going to be a fun trip. Jesus says, it's going to be worth it. Because I've overcome all of it. I promise to use all of it for your good, for my glory. See, Elihu points us to a more balanced view of who God is. That God does not give suffering without purpose. God doesn't give suffering and then just pull himself back and just watch to see what's going to happen. No, Christ in his life and his death on the cross shows us he's willing to enter into suffering himself in order to serve and bring comfort to us even in the midst of it all. Brothers and sisters, we serve a big God. And yes and amen, God's word has spoken to us about who he is. He himself has spoken uniquely by his word to give us revelation of who he is, how he's working, and things that he's done for us. But may we not, in our pride and arrogance, somehow believe that because he has revealed himself here in his word, that he has revealed all of himself. As if we could somehow take that in. Or that now that we have this, we can just scrutinize this, and now we know everything about God, and now we can judge him. Because we see that in our nature. We want to grow in our knowledge of this so that somehow we can get God figured out and keep him in the box we fit for him. The question we must wrestle with this morning, honestly, the question that we will continue to wrestle with, is, are you content with this God? Is this the God of the Scriptures, the God who has revealed himself to be bigger than we can understand, whose ways are inscrutable? We're not allowed to just judge what he does and how he does it. And yet, who has spoken to the degree that we can know him, we can know his presence, we can know his voice. He has revealed to us what he is about. Are we okay with this God? Because if we could really be honest with ourselves, many of us at different points in our lives have created a different kind of God than the one revealed in the Scriptures. And we may not have created it like out of wood, or we have maybe physically created an idol, and then that's what we bow down to, we make sacrifices to it. No, but many of us in our minds, we've called something that we've created in our imagination God, because we didn't know who God really was. We, like Job's friends, and kind of just use pieces and experiences and maybe something our grandparents told us or our parents told us, and we've kind of formed this God in our minds, and that's what we call Jesus, and that's what we worship, and then let suffering come, and we thought this Jesus was going to love us enough not to give us suffering, and now this God crumbles. And we're left, like Job, wondering, who is this God? I thought I had this figured out. I thought I was doing all the right things and earning all the right favor and earning that love. And now I'm suffering. Brothers and sisters, we must be people of the Word that see God for who he is as he has revealed himself. And that is who we come to worship. And the suffering in our lives and the things that God gives, we are not to fight against, but rather look beyond. As Paul says in 2 Corinthians, we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. Are we willing, brothers and sisters, as a body, to even embrace struggles, trials, suffering, walking with one another in grace and in patience and in love, bringing comfort instead of judgment, trusting that even in the hard times, even in the difficulties, even in the questioning and the wrestling, God is working for our good and working to bring glory to his name. Elihu begins to give us this picture And as he continues his discourse, it will move us into God finally showing up and speaking to Job himself. But for us this morning, we are faced once again with a very important question that we need to continually ask ourselves. Are we worshiping the God of the Scriptures, or have we created another one for ourselves that we've named Jesus? Because this Jesus over here likes our righteousness, likes all of our efforts, and likes how good we are, and then rewards us. This one gives us himself in suffering. This one gives us his grace to move us from our own righteousness to trust the righteousness of Christ on our behalf. So that whatever may come, whether it be plenty, whether it be famine, whether it be times of peace, whether it be trials, in it all, he is good, he is working, and he will not abandon us.